If you're approaching retirement and considering drawdown, yes, this flexibility gives you loads of options and it can be extremely powerful. But this freedom can be a poison chalice if market returns are poor, you take too much income, or you panic during a stock market crash. In this video, I'm going to look at 3 things that I would absolutely do with my clients in the build up to retirement if you want to give your retirement the greatest chance for success and retire with confidence. I am convinced that the sequence of returns risk is one of the biggest risks to the success of your retirement. This is the idea that the timing of returns matter, and to give you a crude example, if you retire on the eve of a stock market crash, this has a much more devastating effect on the chances of you running out of money in retirement, as not only are you now taking an income from your invested funds, but you're taking it from a falling portfolio value. This goes hand in hand with knowing how your portfolio or asset allocation has done in the past, as this can help you understand the expected returns or volatility of your portfolio and what it could experience in the future. I like to look at past bear markets or stock market crashes to understand how much a portfolio could potentially go up or down in a really awful period. After all, if your portfolio or asset allocation has gone down by 20, 30 or even 40% or more in the past, although we've all heard past performance is not a guide to the future, which it isn't, but it is reasonable to expect that your portfolio could see similar losses in the future, if not more. If you know to almost expect this and be cognizant of this risks, hopefully you won't panic and throw in the towel and sell your investments at the worst possible time when a stock market crash arrives, which can have a devastating effect on your retirement when it inevitably a stock market crash rears its head. As an IFA, the worst behaviour I've seen firsthand was during COVID, when a retired brain surgeon who was a bit of a know-it-all sold his portfolio in April 2020 after the stock market was down 30-odd%. His investments valued at around 500k, I think it was. Believing that the stock market had further to fall, he sold us all of his investments, convinced that they had further to fall. Despite our protests, he went ahead with it and instructed us to sell his portfolio down. And lo and behold, what happened? The stock market snapped back, and not only did he crystallise what were effective paper losses at the point he sold, but to add further salt to the wounds, he bought back in at higher prices as the stock market went on a bit of a tear when central banks got involved. That's all well and good, Alex, but how do I know how much my portfolio could go up or down, you might be asking, and how long will it take my portfolio to recover when a stock market crash does occur? Well, one way to do this is to use a website called Portfolio Visualizer. A word of warning, this is geared to US individuals, but it's still quite useful. To show how this works, we're going to demonstrate this with a 50% stock and 50% bond portfolio. I'm not advocating this as an investment strategy. I've just simply plucked the numbers from thin air, and it's to simply show you how a weighting of these two asset classes has reacted in periods of extreme shock in the past. Okay, so we're in Portfolio Visualizer. Data goes back from 1987 to today, so nearly let's call it 40 years, give or take. And we can see the returns from on here. So it's this kind of asset allocation has done very well. It's gone up by nearly just over 8% a year, and we can see that in the growth of $10,000. Doesn't matter if we say pounds, we ignore currencies. So 10,000 from 87, it would have grown to where are we? Just under £189,000. But what we want to focus on is the risks and drawdown. Okay, so looking at the drawdowns of how this asset allocation would have done, we could see there's been some significant drops here. These are some of the biggest over this time frame. Most recent one was 2022. If you think back, that was the onset of the war in Ukraine. Inflation surged, interest rates rose dramatically, which had a knock-on effect on both bonds and stocks. Both of them got clobbered, and we can see a fall nearly of 20%. The most dramatic here is the banking crisis, where everyone thought the financial system was going to melt, and then we've got others here, such as the dot-com crash. So the point that we'd like to highlight is that if a drop in your portfolio of, say, 20,
10%, 20%, 30%, if either of those just sounds totally unpalatable, would cause you to panic, then if that is the case, then your risk tolerance is at odds with your investment strategy, and it may be prudent to review things. What I'd also like to highlight is back to what I think is one of the biggest risks, and that's the sequence of returns risk. So what can you do to mitigate this? Well, one, if you look at the underwater period here, which is basically how long it takes for your portfolio to recover from when it started to fall. So you can see here, and the worst one in this time frame was 3 years, some around 2 years, a couple much shorter. But what you can do to mitigate that sequence of returns risk is keep some cash back to cover maybe a year or 2 years worth of expenses. So in other words, the proverbial hits the fan. Instead of taking it from your falling portfolio, you can take it from your cash reserves and give your portfolio time to recover. If you don't have any savings available, or you don't want to do that, one option again could be to perhaps delay retirement, carry on working, let your portfolio recover, or work part-time. You've got all these kind of options available to you. And the final point that shows and really highlights the power of diversification, having your assets spread in different asset classes, is the rolling returns of this asset allocation. So we can see during this time frame, if you hold this portfolio for say more than 5 years here, even if you're the most unluckiest of investors, you'd have almost have generated a positive return. I think it was, what's it there, down by 0.5%. We'll cut that flat. And it just shows you that the longer you hold this portfolio, even if you're the most unluckiest of investors, you'd have still made money. Most unluckiest of investors, just a small gain of 1.55 on average. Yeah, back to that figure, closer to the that mean return that we saw of 8%.
The next thing I'd encourage you to do in the lead up to retirement is to try and calculate what fund value or pension you should be aiming for in retirement. In other words, how much do you need? This can be a bit like how long's a piece of string exercise. So I like to use a pretty simple process that you can adopt. Firstly, you need to work out what your expenses are likely to be in retirement. This could involve increasing or removing the expenses that you'll no longer have to pay. So if the house perhaps is paid off by then, or hopefully will be by then remove the mortgage payment. Perhaps you're planning to enjoy yourself and wish to take a lot more holidays when you retire. Well, if that's the case, then increase your likely budget for holidays. If it's hard to come up with a number or budget for how much you're going to need in retirement, or if it's a really long way away, then you can simply use a rule of thumb to try and estimate how much you think you're going to spend. One of which is to simply take 50 to 70% of your current income. The Retirement Living Standards also carry out a study which looks at how much retirees should need for a basic, moderate or comfortable retirement, and you can use these figures which you can see on the screen now. However, a word of warning, I always do get panned in the comments that these figures are inflated, but I'll leave that to you to make a judgment call when you see them. Once you've calculated what your expenses are likely to be in retirement, well, the next step is to then deduct any forms of income that you may have when you retire. This could be and involve things like state pensions, rental income and final salary pensions if you're lucky enough to have one. So once you've deducted your other source of income from your expenses, you then need to calculate what fund or pension fund you're going to need to address that shortfall. One way to do this is to use the concept of a safe withdrawal rate, which is basically what income can you take as a percentage of your pension fund each year to hopefully not run out of money. 4%, or the 4% rule of the starting pension fund, is often seen as the poster child for safe withdrawal rates, while others would suggest 3% is a more appropriate figure. But again, you're going to even hear some people say that you'd be fine with 5%. The withdrawal rate you use is important, as a high withdrawal rate will mean you need a lower fund value, as you can see on the screen now, although taking a higher amount of income increases the chance that you will run out your fund down. There isn't a right answer with regards to which withdrawal rates you use, and even if you do use a safe withdrawal rate, I wouldn't just blindly follow it, because you're going to have to adapt it to market conditions, your change in expenditure and things like that. Let's put it all together and show you how it works. So Roy and Haley, they've worked out their expenses in retirement are likely to be a combined amount of £50,000 a year, and they should both received their full state pensions, which combined is going to come to just over £23,000. If we deduct this amount from their expenses of 50k, this leaves them with a shortfall of just under £27,000 that they're going to have to plug from their private pensions. So if we take this shortfall amount and divide it by 4%, well, Roy and Hayley should be aiming for a combined retirement fund of just under £675,000. Now, this of course assumes they take the flexible option from their pension known as drawdown. They could opt for an annuity, which is a guaranteed income source. Here you essentially buy a guaranteed income in exchange for the retirement pot or pension fund. It's worth highlighting that a safe withdrawal rate, again, to hammer home the point, doesn't mean you won't run out of money, as returns could be much worse in the future than they've been in the past, or your expenses could surge if you had care fees to pay for and things like that. It's worth highlighting this method doesn't really work if you plan on taking more income earlier in your retirement. Say, for example, if you plan on taking more income before your state pension kicks in and then you'll drop it once you're in receipt of that. Well, if this is you, if you don't want to pay a cash flow forecast, a spreadsheet can do a half decent job. Okay, so if you've worked out what your expenses are likely to be in retirement, well, the next step is to think about how you're going to go about taking an income from your pension fund if you go with drawdown, and how you do this tax efficiently. I've discussed the difference between crystallised and uncrystallised funds, which can scare the life out of you if you've never heard this before, but bear with me. Basically, when it comes to your pension and drawdown, you'll know that usually 25% of your uncrystallised pension is tax-free, with the remaining crystallised funds taxable at your marginal rate of income tax. What you may not know is that it's possible to take a combination of your tax-free cash and taxable income from your crystallised pension to provide a really tax-efficient or even tax-free monthly income from your pension. This can allow you to take advantage of something called your personal allowance, in which the first £12,570 of your income is taxed at 0%. Let's see an example of how this would work. Nancy, she retired at age 63 and her private pension is uncrystallised and valued at 300k. She's got no other forms of income as she hasn't reached state pension age yet, and she's going to need, let's just call it 30k a year initially. So as she has no other income, she's got all of her personal allowance remaining. Using a tax efficient income, Nancy can crystallise £69,720 of her pension with £17,430 paid to her as a tax-free lump sum. The remaining £52,290 are transferred internally within the pension to her crystallised side of her pension. So she still needs £12,570 to meet the rest of her expenses. So she can take this remaining amount from her crystallised funds, which, if you recall, although they are taxable at her marginal rate, as it's within her personal allowance, the effective tax rate would be a whopping 0% on this withdrawal. As an IFA, one thing I'll often hear from clients approaching retirement is that they often want to take all of the tax-free cash at once, even if they've got no specific purpose for it and may just stick it in the bank or under the mattress. They'll often think that if they only take a part of it, or if they don't take it all, well, they'll lose the rest. Well, couldn't be more wrong. It's actually possible to take a series of smaller tax-free lump sums, or you can even take a monthly income made up entirely of your tax-free cash, which would result in paying, yes, you guessed it, no income tax. So let's see an example of how you can use your tax-free cash to create a tax-efficient income again. So John, he's retired, he's got a pension worth 100k that is fully uncrystallised. He needs 4k to cover his expenses, and he's turned to his private pension, this 100k pension. He's a basic rate taxpayer. He gets his teacher's pension worth £20,000 a year. So if he took any withdrawals from his crystallised private pension, they would be subject to 20% income tax. John can take a monthly tax-free cash withdrawal of £333 a month, 4k a year, to meet this shortfall. He's not going to be able to do this indefinitely, as he's eventually going to use up all of that tax-free cash. If this has piqued your interest on drawdown and how it works, watch this video for a more in-depth deep dive on it and other known little details you may not be aware of but are very important.